Hey everyone, I'm your author June. Before we get started, I really would appreciate it if everyone could hit the subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and I would love for all of you to come on this journey with me, as a family. Now, let's get into the story. Let me know if you enjoy. The dust of High Ridge Ranch was a part of Silas. It had settled into the lines of his hands, a fine reddish-brown powder that no amount of scrubbing with lye soap in the bunkhouse basin could ever fully remove. It was in the weave of his denims, in the worn felt of his hat, and, he suspected, in the quiet chambers of his own heart. He'd come to the ranch as a boy of 16, all raw-boned angles and a hunger that went deeper than his belly. Mr. Vaughn, the elder, had seen something in his silence, in the steady way he met a man's gaze. He'd given him a chance, and Silas had repaid that chance with 2 decades of unwavering loyalty, his life measured not in years, but in seasons of branding, calving, and driving the herds through the vast, unforgiving beauty of the Montana territory. Now, at 36, he was the foreman, a man who spoke the language of the land more fluently than he spoke the language of men. His words were few, chosen with the care of a man, crossing a rickety bridge. The other hands respected him for his competence, for the way he could read a coming storm in the color of the sky or spot a sick calf from 100 yards. They saw him as a fixture, as permanent as the granite peaks that clawed at the sky to the west. Invisible in his own way, he was the steady hand on the reins, the silent watcher on the porch, the man who ensured the heart of High Ridge kept beating. The heart of High Ridge was failing. Mr. Vaughn had been gone 5 years, laid to rest in the small family plot overlooking the valley, and his son, a man with more interest in eastern stock markets than livestock, had let the place bleed. Debts mounted like snowdrifts in a hard winter, and the letters from the bank in Bozeman grew more frequent, their tone shifting from polite inquiry to thinly veiled threat. Silas did what he could, stretching every dollar, mending what could be mended, and pushing himself and the men harder than ever before. But he was a foreman, not a miracle worker. He could manage a ranch, but he couldn't conjure money from the dry summer air. The news arrived, as most important news did, not with a bang, but with the slow, grinding sound of a motorcar engine laboring up the long drive. It was an alien sound in a world governed by the clip-clop of hooves and the lowing of cattle. Silas was in the main corral, his shoulder pressed against a skittish gelding, murmuring low tones to gentle it when the sound reached him. He stilled, his hand resting on the horse's trembling flank. The other hands paused, their faces turning towards the lane. The automobile, a gleaming black Ford, was as out of place as a diamond brooch on a burlap sack. It kicked up a plume of that familiar red dust, coating its polished finish and offending its city sensibilities. When it finally shuddered to a halt before the main house, the driver's side door opened. A polished leather boot emerged, followed by a tailored traveling skirt and a woman who seemed to be carved from a different, smoother kind of stone than the people of this land. This was Clara Vaughn. He'd seen a photograph of her once, on the mantel in the main house, a serious-looking girl with ribbons in her hair. The woman who stood before him now bore little resemblance to that child. Her hair was a fashionable city bob, her face framed by a stylish cloche hat. She moved with an assurance that spoke of paved streets and electric lights, her posture straight, her gaze sharp and appraising as it swept over the weathered facade of the house, the corrals, the distant grazing herd. She was all city polish, a creature of a world Silas knew only from newspapers and whispered rumors. Her gaze eventually found him, standing by the corral. It was a brief, dismissive glance, the kind one gives to a piece of unfamiliar equipment. He saw the flicker of impatience in her eyes, the slight tightening of her lips. She was here, just as the letter from her brother had warned. She was here to do what her brother hadn't the stomach to do himself. She was here to sell the land he'd given his life to. She was here to rip the heart out of High Ridge, and, though she would never know it, out of him. He gave the gelding a final, soothing pat and began the slow walk towards her, each step feeling heavier than the last. He was just the foreman, a man of dust and silence, and she was the storm that had finally come for his world. Clara Vaughn found the silence of High Ridge oppressive. In New York, silence was a luxury, a brief, stolen moment between the clang of a trolley and the cry of a newsboy. Here, it was an entity, a vast, breathing thing that pressed in from all sides, broken only by the whine of the wind through the eaves of the sprawling, shadowed ranch house. The house smelled of wood smoke, old leather, and a faint, lingering scent of the lavender her mother had loved. It was a house of ghosts, and she felt like an intruder in her own history. She stood in the center of the great room, her fine wool suit feeling absurdly out of place against the backdrop of dark wood, stone, and the mounted head of a magnificent bull elk her father had shot. Her brother Arthur had been clear in his letter. "The creditors are circling, Clara. Father held on for sentiment's sake, but we cannot afford sentiment. Go, assess the property, meet with the agent, and finalize the sale. It's the only sensible thing to do." Sensible. That was Arthur's favorite word. Her gaze drifted to the window, to the man she had seen in the corral. The foreman. He was walking towards the house, his stride unhurried, his shoulders broad beneath a faded chambray shirt. He moved with an economy of motion she'd never seen before, a quiet competence that was as much a part of him as the weathered hat on his head. As he drew closer, she could see the details, the sun-crinkled corners of his eyes, the firm set of his jaw, the hands that looked as strong and weathered as old oak. He was, she admitted with a detached sort of curiosity, a striking figure, in a rough, untamed way. He was also the living embodiment of everything she had come here to dismantle. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, removing his hat in a gesture of ingrained respect that felt archaic and oddly touching. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was deeper than she'd expected, a low baritone that seemed to resonate with the quiet of the land itself. It was not the voice of a simple farmhand. "You're the foreman?" she asked, her tone cooler than she intended. It was a defense, a way to maintain the distance her task required. "Silas." "Yes, ma'am." He didn't offer a surname. It was as if he and the ranch were one and the same. His eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue, met hers, and for the first time, she felt seen. Not as Clara Vaughn, daughter of the owner, the city woman in fancy clothes, but as a person. It was disconcerting. "I'm Clara Vaughn. I know who you are," he said simply. There was no artifice in him. He stated facts as he saw them. He gestured vaguely towards the dusty automobile. "Long drive." It was. She felt a ridiculous urge to complain about the roads, the dust, the sheer emptiness of it all, but something in his steady gaze stopped her. Such complaints would sound petty and weak to a man like this. "My brother has informed you of my purpose here." A shadow passed over his face, so fleeting she might have imagined it. "He said you were coming to look things over." The euphemism hung in the air between them, thin and unconvincing. "I am," she confirmed, pulling a leather-bound notebook from her satchel. She needed to be efficient, to keep this transaction impersonal. I'll need a full accounting of the ranch's assets. Livestock counts, equipment inventories, ledgers, everything. I'm meeting with a real estate agent in a few days. Silas's gaze shifted from her face to the vast expanse of the valley stretching out behind her, a panorama of rolling grasslands, dark clutches of pine, and the silver ribbon of a distant river. He was quiet for a long moment, and she could feel his resistance, a silent, powerful force. It wasn't insolence. It was something deeper. Grief, perhaps. "The ledgers are in your father's office," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But an inventory, that's not something you can do from a notebook, ma'am. To know this place, you have to see it. You have to ride it." It was a challenge, and they both knew it. He was testing her, questioning her right to pass judgment on a world she didn't understand. A spark of irritation flared within her. "I'm not here to play cowgirl, Silas. I'm here for a business transaction. Selling a man's life's work isn't the same as selling stocks and bonds," he countered, his voice still low, but with an edge of steel she hadn't heard before. "Your father knew that. He knew every square inch of this land. He knew the history of every brand, the name of every horse." He looked at her directly then, and the quiet power in his eyes held her captive. "If you're going to sell it, you should at least have the decency to know what you're throwing away." His words struck a nerve, sharp and true. She thought of her father, of his long, loving descriptions of the ranch in his letters she had often skimmed, impatient with his pastoral ramblings. She had come here armed with logic and financial imperatives, seeing High Ridge as a line item on a balance sheet. This man, this quiet, dusty foreman, was telling her it was a soul. "Fine," she said, her voice clipped to hide the sudden uncertainty that churned within her. "Tomorrow morning, you can show me the ranch." A flicker of something surprise. Respect crossed his features. He nodded once, a gesture of solemn agreement. 6 o'clock. The sun waits for no one. He placed his hat back on his head, the gesture a clear dismissal. He turned and walked back towards the world he belonged to, leaving her alone on the porch with the ghosts of her past and the unnerving feeling that her sensible, straightforward task was about to become infinitely more complicated. The silence of High Ridge no longer felt merely oppressive, it felt like a judgment. The pre-dawn air was cold and sharp, smelling of damp earth and pine. It sliced through Clara's expensive riding coat as she stood on the porch, a testament to her naivety. She'd chosen her best riding habit, a stylish tweed affair from a New York tailor, perfect for a gentle canter in Central Park. Here, under the vast star-pricked bowl of the Montana sky, she felt like a costume doll. The cold was a living thing, and it found every seam and gap in her fashionable attire. Silas was already waiting by the corral, a dark silhouette against the first pale blush of dawn. 2 horses were saddled and ready, their breath pluming in the frigid air. One was a large, powerful-looking beast, clearly his. The other was a more refined mare, a beautiful palomino with a gentle eye. As she approached, he turned, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He gave her outfit a quick, clinical glance, but made no comment. His silence was more damning than any critique. "Her name is Dulcie," he said, gesturing to the palomino. "She was your mother's favorite. Gentle-natured, but sure-footed." The words were a small, unexpected kindness that caught her off guard. Her mother, a woman she remembered as a cascade of laughter and the scent of roses, had ridden this very horse. Suddenly, the animal was not just livestock. It was a link to a past she had kept carefully packed away. She reached out a gloved hand and stroked the mare's soft nose, a lump forming in her throat. Silas watched her for a moment before turning to his own mount. "We'll start with the northern pastures. It's where the best grazing is this time of year." He swung into his saddle with a fluid grace that seemed to make him one with the horse. He looked down at her, waiting. Clara, who had considered herself an accomplished equestrian, found mounting the Western-style saddle a clumsy, awkward affair. The horn got in the way, and the stirrups felt foreign. She felt a flush of embarrassment, certain he was judging her. But when she finally settled into the seat, his face betrayed nothing but a patient neutrality. They rode out as the sun's first rays spilled over the eastern peaks, setting the landscape ablaze with gold and rose. The sheer scale of the place was overwhelming. From the porch, it was a pretty picture. From the back of a horse, it was a world, an empire of grass and sky. Silas rode just ahead of her, a silent guide leading her into his kingdom. He didn't speak, but his presence was a constant narration. He pointed out a golden eagle circling high above, its wings spread against the impossibly blue sky. He gestured towards a shallow depression in the land, explaining it was a buffalo wallow, a relic from a time before cattle. He spoke of the land not as property, but as a complex, living system. He knew the names of the grasses bluebunch wheatgrass, Idaho fescuand, which ones the cattle preferred. He explained how they rotated the herds to prevent overgrazing, a concept that sounded more like careful husbandry than industrial farming. His knowledge was intimate, encyclopedic. It was the knowledge of a man who hadn't just worked the land, but had listened to it. "This section here," he said, reining in his horse on a rise that overlooked a vast green meadow where hundreds of cattle grazed peacefully. "This is the heart of the operation. The water comes down from the snowmelt in the Wolf Mountains. It's clean, reliable. Land without water is just scenery. This land is life." Clara looked out at the scene, the lowing of the cattle a peaceful symphony, the sun warm on her face now. She tried to see it through the eyes of Abaya. Excellent water rights. Prime grazing land. Healthy stock. But Silas's words had planted a different seed in her mind. Asterisk. This land is life. Asterisk. She saw the new calves, sticking close to their mothers. She saw the way the light played on the tips of the grass. She felt the steady, powerful presence of the mare beneath her. It wasn't just a collection of assets. It was a cycle, a rhythm, a world unto itself. They stopped by a creek for a midday break. Silas produced a canvas satchel from his saddlebags, handing her a piece of jerky and a canteen. The jerky was tough, salty, and surprisingly delicious. The water from the canteen was cold and clean, tasting of metal and earth. She sat on a sun-warmed boulder, pulling off her gloves and feeling the unfamiliar texture of the rough stone against her palms. She was aware of him sitting nearby, his back against a cottonwood tree, his hat tipped low over his eyes. The silence between them was different now. It was no longer oppressive, but comfortable, companionable. "Why did you stay?" she asked, the question surprising her as much as it probably surprised him. "All these years. You could have gone anywhere. Started your own place." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he pushed his hat back on his head, his blue eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "Came here with nothing," he said, his voice low and reflective. "Your father, he gave me more than wages. He gave me a purpose. Taught me how to read the land, how to understand the animals. Taught me what it meant to build something that would last. This place gets into your blood. Leaving would be like cutting off a part of myself. He spoke of her father with a reverence that she, his own daughter, had never quite managed. To her, he had been a loving but distant figure, a man more at home in these wide-open spaces than in a New York drawing room. To Silas, he had been a mentor, a guide, a maker of men. "He thought the world of you," Silas added, his gaze finally turning to meet hers. "He was proud of your schooling, your cleverness. He kept all your letters." The words were like a physical blow. She thought of those letters, dashed off in a hurry, filled with complaints about her studies or gossip about her friends. She had never considered what they might have meant to him. A lonely man in a vast landscape, holding on to a piece of his city-dwelling daughter. For the first time, a genuine, painful shame washed over her. "I didn't," she began, but couldn't finish. "I didn't understand." "No," Silas said, his voice gentle, devoid of accusation. "You didn't." He stood up, the spell broken. "We should head back. There's a long ride yet, and I've got chores to see to." The ride back was different. Clara no longer felt like an observer. She felt implicated. Every hill and valley, every stand of trees, now seemed to hold a piece of her father's story. A story that Silas knew better than she did. She watched the man riding ahead of her, his straight back, his easy command of his horse, his profound connection to the world around him. He was the ranch's memory, its conscience. And she was here to sign its death warrant. The thought, which had seemed so sensible and logical just yesterday, now felt like a betrayal. Not just of the land, or of Silas, but of the father she was only now beginning to know. The dust of High Ridge was starting to settle on her, too, and she was no longer sure she wanted to brush it off. In the days that followed, a strange, unspoken routine developed. Each morning, Clara would meet Silas at dawn. She'd traded her stylish riding habit for a pair of practical denim trousers and a sturdy blouse borrowed from a trunk of her mother's old clothes. The fit was a little loose, the style decades out of date, but they were comfortable and didn't earn her Silas's silent disapproval. He never commented on the change, but she noticed a subtle easing in his shoulders, a slight relaxation of the stern line of his jaw. He showed her everything. They rode the fence lines, checking for breaks, the rhythmic creak of saddle leather a constant companion. He taught her how to spot the tracks of a coyote, how to tell the age of a calf by its size and gait. She learned the ranch wasn't one single entity, but a collection of smaller, interconnected worlds. There was the quiet, sun-dappled world of the creek beds, lined with cottonwoods and willows. There was the harsh, windswept world of the high plateaus, where the grass was thin and the views stretched on forever. And there was the busy, man-made world of the ranch yard, with the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the smell of baking bread from the cookhouse, and the low, constant murmur of the hands going about their work. She started spending time in that world, too. She found her father's old ledgers in his office, the pages filled with his elegant looping script. But alongside the columns of figures were notes scribbled in the margins. Millie's foal born today, strong and healthy. Droughts taking its toll on the south pasture. Need to move the herd. Silas has a good head on his shoulders, sees things others miss. It was a diary of his life, his worries, his hopes. It was the story of a man deeply in love with his work. One afternoon, she found Silas in the workshop, his brow furrowed in concentration as he meticulously repaired a piece of a complex hay rake. His large, calloused hands moved with a surgeon's precision, cleaning and oiling each part before fitting it back into place. She watched him, unnoticed, for several minutes, fascinated by the intensity of his focus. This was not the work of a man simply passing the time. This was the work of a man who believed in maintenance, in preservation, in making things last. It was the complete opposite of her mission. "Can I help?" she asked, her voice startling him. He looked up, his blue eyes wide with surprise. He wiped his greasy hands on a rag. "It's fine work, ma'am. Not suited for," he trailed off, gesturing vaguely at her clean clothes. "I'm not made of glass," she said, her tone sharper than she intended. She was tired of being treated like a visitor. She picked up a rag. "Tell me what to do." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and revealing a warmth she hadn't seen before. He hesitated, then pointed to a bucket of grimy gears. "They need cleaning." With the solvent. For the next hour they worked in a comfortable, productive silence. The sharp chemical smell of the solvent filled the air. Clara scrubbed at the gears, the grease working its way under her fingernails, staining her hands. She didn't care. There was something deeply satisfying about the simple physical task, about contributing, in some small way, to the running of the place. She felt the tension in her shoulders, a tension she hadn't even been aware she was carrying, begin to unwind. "Why are you doing this?" Silas asked eventually, his voice quiet. He hadn't stopped working, his hands still moving with that same focused precision. "Doing what?" "This," he said, nodding towards the bucket. "Riding out every day. Getting your hands dirty. You have the information you need. The agent is coming Friday. You could be sitting on the porch, waiting." She scrubbed at a particularly stubborn patch of grease. "You said I should know what I was throwing away," she said, meeting his gaze. "I'm beginning to see what you meant." His hands stilled. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and in that moment, the carefully constructed walls between them seemed to dissolve. The foreman and the owner's daughter, the countryman and the city woman, those labels faded, leaving just a man and a woman in a dusty workshop, sharing a moment of unexpected connection. "High Ridge isn't just land and cattle, is it?" she said, thinking aloud. "It's a community. It's a way of life." "It is," he affirmed. "It's a hard life, but it's a good one. There's honor in it." Honor. That was the word. It was in the way the men treated each other, with a rough but genuine respect. It was in the care they took with the animals. It was in Silas's unwavering dedication. It was a concept that felt foreign and quaint in her world of contracts and loopholes and cynical negotiations. Later that evening, the real estate agent from Bozeman, a slick, fast-talking man named Henderson, arrived. He spread his maps and contracts across the polished dining table, his voice loud and jarring in the quiet house. He spoke of offers, of zoning potential, of maximizing return on investment. His words were the language of her world, the language of Arthur, the language she had come here to speak. But now they sounded hollow, obscene. "The offer from the consortium is excellent, Miss Vaughn," Henderson said, tapping a manicured finger on a dotted line. "They see the potential for development, subdividing the lower valley, perhaps a private hunting lodge on the upper plateau. It's a gold mine, if you handle it right." Clara looked from the sterile lines on the map to the window, where the last light of day was painting the mountains in hues of purple and orange. She imagined the valley carved up into neat little squares, the quiet shattered by construction and the chatter of wealthy tourists. She thought of the eagle's nest Silas had shown her, the ancient buffalo wallow, her mother's palomino mare. A wave of nausea washed over her. Silas entered the room then, silent as a shadow. He had come to ask her a question about the next day's work, but he stopped when he saw the scene at the table. His eyes took in the maps, the contracts, the smug look on Henderson's face. His gaze then moved to Clara's, and she saw a flash of profound disappointment, a shuddering of the connection that had been growing between them. In his eyes, she was once again the outsider, the executioner. He nodded curtly, a silent apology for the intrusion, and retreated, his presence lingering in the room like a silent accusation. "So, Miss Vaughn?" Henderson said, oblivious. "Shall we proceed? All we need is your signature." Clara stared at the line, at the pen he offered her. Just a few strokes, and it would all be over. Her duty to her brother would be fulfilled. The debts would be paid. She could return to her life, to her world. But as she looked at the paper, she didn't see a contract. She saw Silas's face, his quiet disappointment. She saw the land, not as a map, but as a living, breathing thing. And she knew, with a certainty that terrified and thrilled her, that she couldn't do it. "No," she said, her voice shaking slightly but firm. "Not yet. I need more time." She pushed the contract away, the simple act feeling like a declaration of war against her own life. Henderson stared at her, his jaw agape, while outside, the vast Montana night settled over a ranch that was, for one more day at least, still whole. The arrival of Mr. Alistair Sterling was announced not by the chug of an automobile, but by the crisp snap of a telegram delivered by a boy on a lathered horse. The message was for Clara, from her brother Arthur. Sterling arriving Thursday to assist. Represents interested party with significant offer. Finalize deal with his guidance. Imperative. The name struck a discordant note in the quiet harmony Clara had begun to find at High Ridge. Alistair Sterling was a name whispered with a certain reverence in her New York circles. He was a scion of an old banking family, impeccably dressed, unnervingly charming, and ruthlessly successful. He had been a persistent, if uninspiring suitor for the past year, a match her brother heartily endorsed. Sterling was everything her world valued, wealthy, powerful, and polished to a high sheen. He arrived in a hired carriage, refusing to subject his own vehicle or person to the final rutted miles to the ranch. He stepped out onto the porch looking as if he'd just emerged from a London tailor's shop, his suit immaculate, his shoes gleaming. He surveyed the rustic scene with an air of amused condescension, his thin lips curving into a smile that didn't reach his cold gray eyes. "Clara, my dear," he said, taking her hand and brushing his lips against her knuckles. His touch was dry and cool. "A brave little soldier, venturing into the wilderness. Arthur was worried you were getting in over your head." His gaze swept past her to the corrals, the bunkhouse, and Silas, who was watching from a distance with an unnerving stillness. "I can see why. It's all very rustic." The word, from his lips, was an insult. Clara withdrew her hand. "It's my home, Alistair. Or it was. A charming sentiment, but sentiment doesn't pay the bills, does it?" he said smoothly, placing a proprietary hand on the small of her back to guide her inside. "Arthur has filled me in. A magnificent piece of land. The syndicate I represent is prepared to be extremely generous. We'll have this settled in a day or two, and you can come back to civilization." Sterling's presence was a blight on the landscape. He moved through the ranch house as if he already owned it, commenting on the drafty construction and the charming, if impractical, antiques. He treated the ranch hands with a dismissive wave, as if they were part of the scenery. His interactions with Silas were the most telling. He looked at the foreman not as a man, but as a piece of farm equipment, to be ordered about and then ignored. "Foreman," he called out from the porch one afternoon as Silas was crossing the yard, "have one of your men see to my boots. The dust here is simply appalling." Silas stopped. He didn't look at Sterling. He looked at Clara, who was standing frozen in the doorway. His face was a mask of stone, but she could see the muscles in his jaw bunch. For a tense moment, the entire ranch seemed to hold its breath. Then, without a word, Silas turned and walked away, disappearing into the barn. He had not refused the order, but he had not obeyed it either. He had simply erased Sterling from his world. The dismissal was more profound than any angry retort. Sterling, however, was oblivious. "Insolent lout," he muttered, before turning his attention back to Clara. "You see what you're dealing with? No sense of proper station. Once we take over, we'll bring in a professional manager, someone who understands efficiency, not just cows." The tension between the two men was a low hum beneath the surface of every interaction. It was a clash of worlds, of values. Sterling, with his talk of money and efficiency, and Silas, with his silent, powerful connection to the land. Clara found herself caught in the middle, her loyalties torn. Sterling represented the life she was supposed to want, the life of ease and security her brother championed. Silas represented something else, something wilder, harder, but infinitely more real. The conflict came to a head during a sudden, violent summer thunderstorm. A bolt of lightning struck a massive old pine on a ridge overlooking the valley, and the tree exploded into flames. In the dry conditions, the fire spread with terrifying speed, a ravenous orange beast racing towards a stand of timber that was one of the ranch's most valuable assets. Panic erupted. The hands shouted, running for horses and equipment. Sterling stood on the porch, a look of annoyance on his face, as if the fire were a personal inconvenience. "Good heavens," he said. "Someone should call the fire brigade." "There is no fire brigade out here," Clara snapped, her patience worn thin. It was Silas who brought order to the chaos. His voice cut through the noise, calm and authoritative. "Jake, Tom, get the water wagon hitched. Ben, you and the boys start a fire break. Use the North Ravine as your anchor. Move." He wasn't shouting, he was commanding, and the men responded instantly, their panic replaced by focused action. He turned to go, but then his eyes met Clara's. "Stay in the house. It's safer." Before she could protest, Sterling stepped forward. "An excellent idea, Foreman. You handle your rustic emergency. Miss Vaughn and I will be waiting." But Clara wasn't listening. She saw the grim set of Silas's jaw, the exhaustion already etched around his eyes. She saw the way the other men looked to him, their trust absolute. And in that moment, she knew where she belonged. "I'm coming with you," she said to Silas, her voice clear and steady. He looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "You don't have to." "I know." She pulled on the old pair of work gloves she now kept by the door. Sterling scoffed. "Clara, don't be ridiculous. This is no place for a lady. You'll ruin your clothes." "It's better than ruining a ranch," she retorted, not even looking at him. She followed Silas out into the smoke-filled twilight, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a strange, exhilarating sense of purpose. She spent the next 6 hours working alongside the men, her face black with soot, her lungs aching from the smoke. She hauled buckets of water, beat at smoldering embers with a wet burlap sack, and did whatever Silas told her to do. She watched him orchestrate the fight like a general on a battlefield. He was everywhere at once, his presence a steadying force, his knowledge of the terrain their greatest weapon. He knew exactly where the wind would shift, where the fire would run, where to make their stand. It was a terrifying, awe-inspiring display of competence and courage. By dawn, the fire was contained. A wide black scar marred the hillside, but the timber was saved. The men were exhausted, grimy, but victorious. They gathered by the cook wagon, where the cook was handing out steaming lugs of coffee. Clara leaned against a fence post, every muscle in her body screaming in protest. Silas approached her, his face streaked with soot, a deep weariness in his eyes that was mirrored by a profound respect. "You did good work tonight, Clara," he said, his use of her first name, a quiet acknowledgement of the barrier that had fallen between them. "You saved the ranch," she replied, her voice hoarse. "We saved the ranch," he corrected gently. His gaze was intense, and the space between them crackled with an unspoken energy. In the shared trial by fire, something had been forged. He took a half-step closer, and she thought, for one heart-stopping moment, that he was going to kiss her. The air was thick with the possibility of it. But the moment was shattered by Sterling's voice, sharp and proprietary, calling her name from the porch. The spell was broken. Silas's expression hardened, the connection severed. He gave her a brief, formal nod and turned away to rejoin his men. Clara watched him go, a hollow ache in her chest. She had fought for the ranch, but in doing so, she had drawn a battle line, and she was no longer sure which side she would be on when the final war was waged. The fire left a physical scar on the land, a black, weeping wound on the hillside, but it left a deeper, less visible scar on the relationships within the ranch house. The atmosphere grew thick with unspoken resentments and undeclared allegiances. Sterling, feeling his authority had been undermined by the night's events, doubled down on his efforts to finalize the sale. He was a constant presence at Clara's side, his voice a smooth, insistent poison in her ear, painting a picture of a future in New York filled with elegant parties and intellectual pursuits, a world away from this primitive struggle for survival. "You saw it for yourself, my dear," he argued over. "Breakfast," gesturing vaguely towards the window with his silver fork. "This place is one disaster away from ruin. It's a constant battle against nature. It's no life for a woman of your refinement. My syndicate will take this burden off your hands, and you will be richly rewarded for your family's long, and I'm sure, tiresome, stewardship." His words, which might have once sounded logical, now felt like a personal attack. She looked at her hands, the nails still rimmed with soot, a blister forming on her palm. She had never felt less refined, and yet she had never felt more alive. She sought out Silas later that day, finding him in the barn, his hands moving with quiet efficiency as he treated a minor cut on a horse's leg. The air smelled of hay, liniment, and horsehide. It was a scent she was beginning to associate with a sense of peace. "He's pressuring me," she said without preamble, leaning against the rough-hewn wood of the stall. "Sterling. He has the final papers drawn up. He wants me to sign them by the end of the week." Silas didn't look up from his work, his touch on the horse gentle and sure. "It's a good offer. Your brother will be pleased. The debts will be paid." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but she could hear the undercurrent of resignation, of defeat. He was letting her go. He was stepping back into the role he'd always occupied, the loyal foreman, the invisible man. "And what about you?" she pressed, a desperate edge to her voice. "What will you do?" He finally straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at her, his blue eyes clouded with a sorrow so deep it took her breath away. "Me? I'm the foreman. I work the ranch. If there's no rancha—" He shrugged. a gesture of profound helplessness. "I'll find work somewhere else." The thought of High Ridge without Silas was like imagining the sky without the sun. It was unthinkable. He belonged here. He was the anchor, the memory, the soul of the place. "I don't want you to go," she whispered, the words a raw, honest admission. A storm of emotion passed over his face, longing, pain, a flicker of hope that was almost instantly extinguished. He took a step towards her, his hand half raising as if to touch her, before he seemed to remember himself, to remember the vast, unbridgeable gulf between them. He was the hired hand. She was the owner. "What you want doesn't change what has to be done," he said, his voice rough. "Sterling is right about one thing. This is a hard life. It's not for you." He turned his back to her then, a clear dismissal, and began to busy himself with arranging the tack, his movements stiff and unnatural. The rejection was more painful than any argument. He was building a wall between them, brick by painful brick, to protect himself from a hope he didn't believe he had the right to feel. And perhaps to protect her too. That night, unable to sleep, Clara found herself in her father's office. The room was a sanctuary, a place where the ghosts felt friendly. She ran her hand over his worn leather chair, sat at his desk, and, on a whim, began to go through the drawers. Beneath a stack of old plat maps, her fingers brushed against a small, locked metal box. She remembered it from her childhood. Her father had called it his box of ideas. After a brief search, she found the key hidden in a hollowed-out book on the shelf. Inside the box were not valuables but notebooks, dozens of them, filled with her father's script. But these were different from the ledgers. These were plans, dreams. There were detailed drawings for an irrigation system that would bring water from the upper river down to the drier south pastures, effectively doubling the ranch's grazing capacity. There were notes on crossbreeding cattle, ideas for introducing a more resilient strain that could better withstand the harsh winters. There was a meticulously thought-out proposal for a cooperative with the smaller neighboring ranches, a plan to pool resources to get better prices for their beef back east, cutting out the middlemen who bled them dry. It was a blueprint for the future, a future that had died with him. As she read, a slow-burning anger began to replace her despair. Her father hadn't been clinging to the past out of pure sentiment. He had been fighting for the future, a future her brother, in his haste and ignorance, had dismissed as a lost cause. At the very bottom of the box, she found a letter, addressed to her. Her name was written in her father's familiar hand. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Asterisk, my dearest Clara. Asterisk, asterisk. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you have come home. I know Arthur will be talking of selling. From a practical standpoint, he is not wrong. The ranch is in debt, and I have made my share of mistakes. But High Ridge is more than an investment, my girl. It is a legacy, not a legacy of land, but of spirit, of resilience. Asterisk, asterisk, there is so much potential here, so many ideas. I never had the time or the capital to see through. I've left them for you, in this box. But ideas are nothing without the right hands to build them. There is a man on this ranch, Silas. You will know him by his quiet nature and his capable hands. He understands this land better than I ever did. He is a man of uncommon integrity and strength. If there is any hope for this place, it lies with him. Trust him, Clara. He is the best man I have ever known. Asterisk, asterisk, whatever you choose to do, Know that my greatest pride was never this ranch, but you. Be happy, my daughter. Asterisk, asterisk, your loving father. Asterisk, Clara sat in the silent office, tears streaming down her face, clutching the letter to her chest. It was a message from the grave, a final gift from her father. He had not just left her a failing ranch, he had left her a map, a plan, and a partner. He had seen the truth of Silas long before she had. Asterisk, trust him. Asterisk, the words echoed in her heart. She had been wrestling with a choice between two men, between two worlds. But her father had shown her there was a third option. Not a choice between Sterling and Silas, but a choice between surrender and a fight. She looked out the window at the moonlit yard. A single lamp burned in the bunkhouse, a lonely beacon in the dark. She knew, with every fiber of her being, that Silas was in there, awake, just as she was. He believed he had nothing to offer her. Her father and her own heart had just told her he had everything. Now, she just had to find a way to make him believe it, too. Armed with her father's letter and his box of dreams, Clara felt a seismic shift within her. The fog of indecision had lifted, replaced by a clarity so sharp and bright it was almost painful. She was no longer a visitor, an assessor, or an executor of her brother's will. She was her father's daughter, and the fight for High Ridge was now her own. She waited until the following afternoon, a time when she knew Sterling would be taking his customary nap, a habit he insisted was essential for civilized constitution. She found Silas where she knew he would be, in the high northern pasture, his lone figure a familiar silhouette against the vast sky as he checked on a section of fence. He worked with a steady, rhythmic grace, his movements economical and precise. He was so much a part of the landscape that he seemed to have sprung from the earth itself. She rode Dulcie up the rise, the Palomino's hooves making soft thuds on the turf. He heard her approach and turned, his face guarded, the easy camaraderie of the fire now replaced by a careful, painful distance. He looked at her, then his gaze flickered to the metal box she had tied to her saddle. "Silas," she began, her voice stronger than she felt. "We need to talk. There's nothing left to say," he said, his voice low. He turned back to the fence post he was securing. "The deal is all but done. You should be packing your bags." "No." She dismounted, walking towards him, her boots sinking slightly into the rich soil. "The deal is not done." She untied the box and set it on the ground between them. "My father left this for me." He eyed the box with suspicion, then looked at her, his blue eyes questioning. She knelt and opened it, revealing the notebooks within. She took one out, its cover worn, its pages filled with her father's hand. "These are his plans," she explained, her voice trembling with the force of her discovery. "His ideas for the future of the ranch, an irrigation system for the south pasture, a plan to improve the herd, a cooperative to get a fair price for our cattle." She looked up at him, her heart in her eyes. He wasn't just holding on, Silas. He was planning. He was fighting. Silas stared at the open notebook in her hand, his expression unreadable. He slowly knelt, his large frame folding with a quiet reverence. He took the notebook from her, his calloused fingers tracing the lines of ink, as if to absorb the meaning through touch alone. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the detailed drawings, the careful calculations. He saw not just the ideas, but the mind behind them, the hope. "I knew he was working on some of this," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "He talked about it, late at night, but I never knew it was this complete." He looked from the notebook to the vast expanse of the ranch spread out below them. He was seeing it not as it was, but as it could be. He left a letter, too, Clara continued, her voice softening. For me. She paused, gathering her courage. He wrote about you. He said, if there was any hope for this place, it lies with you. He told me to trust you. He said you were the best man he'd ever known. At this, Silas finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers. She saw a lifetime of carefully controlled emotions swirling in their depths. Surprise, disbelief, and a raw, vulnerable hope that he seemed afraid to acknowledge. The walls he had so carefully constructed around his heart began to crumble. Clara, he started, his voice a hoarse whisper. Don't, she said, stopping him. Don't tell me it's impossible. Don't tell me it's not my place. This is my place. And it's yours, too. My father saw it. And now, so do I. She reached out, her hand covering his on the notebook. His skin was rough against hers, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her. This is not just his dream anymore. It can be our dream. But I can't do it alone. I don't have your knowledge, your strength. I have the ideas, and perhaps a way to find the money. But you are the only one who can make it real. Air. The air was still, the only sound the sigh of the wind through the tall grass. He stared at their hands, his larger one, almost completely covering hers. He was a man who had spent his life in the background. A man who believed his worth was measured only in his labor, in his loyalty to another's dream. He had never dared to have a dream of his own. And now, this woman, this impossible, astonishing woman, was offering him one. She wasn't just offering him a chance to save the ranch. She was offering him a partnership, a future. He slowly, deliberately, turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers. His grip was firm, solid, a silent promise. Your father, he was a dreamer, Silas said, his voice raspy. I'm just a foreman. You're more than that, she insisted, her grip tightening on his. And it's time you believed it. This won't be easy, he warned, his gaze sweeping over the land, seeing not just the beauty, but the hardship, the work, the endless challenges. Sterling, your brother, the banks, they won't just walk away. Then we'll fight them, she declared, a fierce determination hardening her features. You taught me how to fight a fire, Silas. Now, teach me how to fight for this. A slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine, unguarded smile she had ever seen from him. It was like watching the sunrise, chasing away all the shadows. It lit his eyes from within, revealing the full depth of the man she was only just beginning to know. All right, Clara Vaughn, he said, the sound of her name on his lips both a prayer and a battle cry. All right, let's fight. In that moment, on that high ridge, with her father's dreams laid out between them and their hands clasped together, they were no longer foreman and owner's daughter. They were partners. A quiet man who had never asked for anything, and a city woman who was about to risk everything, had just made a pact. The battle for High Ridge had officially begun. The descent from the ridge was a descent into war. The shared moment of hope and purpose solidified into a grim resolve as they rode back towards the ranch house, the headquarters of the man they now considered the enemy. Alistair Sterling was no longer just an unwelcome suitor. He was the advance guard of an invading army, and they had just declared their intention to resist. Their strategy session was held in the one place Sterling would never venture, the barn. Amid the comforting smells of hay and leather, with the low, soft sounds of the animals around them, they spread her father's notebooks across a makeshift table of stacked barrels. The single lantern cast a warm, conspiratorial glow on their faces. For the first time, Clara saw Silas truly come alive. As he pored over her father's plans, his initial reverence gave way to a sharp, practical intelligence. He was no longer just the hands of the operation, he was its brain. He pointed out potential flaws in the irrigation design, suggesting modifications based on his intimate knowledge of the seasonal water flow. He expanded on the cattle breeding ideas, naming specific bloodlines that would thrive in the harsh climate. He saw the genius in the cooperative plan, but also the pitfalls, the stubborn independence of the local ranchers who would need to be convinced. This changes everything," he said, his voice filled with an energy she'd never heard before. He was looking at the notebooks, but he was seeing a vibrant, prosperous future. With this irrigation, the south pasture could support another 200 head. If we can improve the stock, the value of each animal increases. The co-op, if we can make it work. We cut out the middlemen in Helena and deal directly with the stockyards in Chicago. We wouldn't just be surviving, we could be thriving. But it all requires capital, Clara countered, the practical, city-bred, part of her taking over. Capital we don't have. The banks have already turned Arthur down. The banks turned him down for a loan to cover existing debt, Silas reasoned, his finger tracing a line on a map. That's asking them to throw good money after bad. We're not asking for a handout, we're presenting a business plan. A proposal for investment in a profitable future. He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a newfound fire. You're the one who knows their world, Clara. You speak their language. I can make the plan for the land. You have to be the one to make the plan for the money. The role reversal was dizzying. He, the man of the earth, was talking business strategy, while she, the woman of finance, felt her heart pound with the thrill of his vision. It was a perfect partnership, a dovetailing of skills and worlds. Their first move was to confront Sterling. They found him on the porch, smoking a thin cigar, the very picture of idle wealth. He looked up as they approached together, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes at the sight of Silas at Clara's side. "Alistair," Clara began, her voice cool and firm. "I've made a decision. I will not be selling High Ridge." Sterling's eyebrows shot up. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "My dear, I think the sun has gotten to you. Of course you're selling. It's all been arranged." "I am breaking the arrangement," she stated, leaving no room for argument. She held up the leather-bound proposal she and Silas had spent the morning drafting, a summary of her father's plans and Silas's practical additions. "I have an alternative, a plan to make the ranch profitable again." Sterling's gaze flickered from the proposal to Silas, his expression curdling with disdain. "Let me guess. The foreman here has filled your head with rustic fantasies. Plans drawn in the dirt with a stick, I imagine?" "This is my father's plan," Clara said, her voice like ice. "And Silas is the only man capable of executing it. He will be my partner in this. He is no longer just the foreman, he is the general manager of this ranch, effective immediately." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Silas stood beside her, his posture straight, his face unreadable but for the proud light in his eyes. He didn't flinch under Sterling's venomous glare. He was no longer the invisible man. He was standing in the light, at her side. Sterling's charm finally cracked, revealing the ugly, arrogant man beneath. He rose from his chair, his face contorted with fury. "You are being a fool, Clara. A sentimental, naive fool. You would throw away a fortune and a comfortable future for this dirt grubber? For a fantasy scribbled in a notebook? Your brother will hear of this. The bank will hear of this. They will foreclose. You will be left with nothing. And this man," he sneered, jabbing a finger in Silas's direction, "will have dragged you down into the mud with him. I'd rather have a future built on mud and hard work with an honorable man," Clara shot back, "than a life of ease bought with the soul of this place." The declaration hung in the air, an undeniable testament to her choice. Sterling stared at her, his face pale with rage and astonishment. He saw that he had lost. He had underestimated her, and he had fatally underestimated the quiet man standing next to her. "You will regret this," he hissed, his voice low and threatening. He stormed past them, into the house to pack his things. The first battle was won. As the sound of Sterling's carriage faded down the long drive an hour later, a profound quiet settled over the ranch. It was the quiet of a storm that is past, leaving a clean, fresh world in its wake. But they both knew this was only the beginning. Sterling's threats were not idle. The bank and her brother were still out there, forces that could yet destroy everything they had just sworn to build. Clara turned to Silas, a tremor of fear running through her. "Was I a fool?" He looked down at her, his expression softening. He reached out, his thumb gently brushing a smudge of dirt from her cheek. The simple, intimate gesture spoke volumes. "No, Clara," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in her sea of uncertainty. "You were magnificent." He didn't touch her further, but the space between them was charged. A promise of a future that was no longer about the ranch, but about them. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, they were truly fighting it together. The departure of Alistair Sterling was a temporary victory. A brief, clean silence before the inevitable roar of the approaching storm. Clara's telegram to her brother, informing him of her decision and Silas's new role, was met with a swift and furious reply. "Utterly unacceptable. You have been swayed by a hired hand. I am coming." The words felt like a slap, a complete dismissal of her judgment and her newfound purpose. The days leading up to Arthur's arrival were a strange mix of frantic preparation and stolen moments of profound connection. Under the vast, indifferent sky, Clara and Silas worked as one. They refined the business proposal, Silas providing the raw, practical data, and Clara shaping it into the precise, persuasive language of bankers and investors. She discovered a sharp, analytical mind beneath his quiet exterior, a natural strategist who saw the interconnectedness of everything, from the health of the soil to the mood of the market. He, in turn, was constantly surprised by her tenacity and her quick grasp of the complex realities of ranching. She wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty, to ask questions, to learn. One evening, as they sat on the porch steps, the ledgers and notebooks spread around them, the setting sun casting long shadows across the yard, she looked up from a column of figures, her head aching. "It's not enough," she said in frustration. "Even with the best projections, we need a significant capital infusion to start. We need to buy the new breeding stock, purchase the equipment for the irrigation we need, to convince the bank in Bozeman to take a massive risk." Silas was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the darkening mountains. "Maybe we're looking in the wrong place," he said slowly. He pointed towards the small, twinkling lights of the town of Prairie Creek in the distance. "Your father's cooperative plan, it wasn't just about selling. It was about shared strength. Old Man Hemlock over on the Double H has been struggling for years. The Miller boys to the south lost half their herd last winter. They don't trust banks, and they don't trust outsiders. But they respected your father, and they respect this ranch. You think they would invest? Clara asked, skeptical. They have no money. They have land, Silas countered. They have cattle. They have generations of knowledge. What if we don't ask for money? What if we offer them a partnership? We provide the land for a new prime breeding herd, the central point for the irrigation. They provide the initial stock, the manpower. We create the cooperative your father dreamed of, not just as a selling union, but as a true partnership. We rise together, or we fall together. We present that to the bank a united front, a consortium of local ranchers, not just one desperate woman and her foreman. It was audacious, brilliant, and deeply rooted in the culture of the West, a land where neighbors helped neighbors, where a man's word was his bond. It was a plan that would never have occurred to her, or to Arthur, or to Sterling. It was a Silas plan. The next day they rode out, not to survey their own land, but to visit their neighbors. It was a humbling, difficult task. The ranchers were weathered, skeptical men, their faces etched with the hardships of their lives. They looked at Clara, the city woman in her practical but still too new denim, with suspicion. They listened to her talk of finance and projections with polite but distant courtesy. It was Silas they watched. They knew him. They had seen him at market, worked alongside him at roundups. They knew his quiet competence, his deep-seated honor. He didn't give them a speech. He spoke to them in their own language, of cattle bloodlines, of water rights, of the way the big beef consortiums in the East were squeezing them all, one by one. He didn't promise them riches, he promised them a fighting chance. He laid out her father's vision, not as a dream, but as a practical blueprint for survival. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to win them over. It was a nod from grizzled old Hemlock, a thoughtful question from one of the Miller boys. They didn't get a firm commitment, not yet, but they planted a seed of hope in dry, fallow ground. They returned to High Ridge late that night, bone-weary but filled with a fragile optimism. As they unsaddled the horses in the quiet of the barn, a wave of exhaustion and emotion washed over Clara. The weight of the past few days, the hope and the fear, settled upon her. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "for believing in this, for believing in me." Silas stopped what he was doing and turned to her. In the soft lantern light, his face was all sharp angles and deep shadows. The distance he had so carefully maintained was gone, stripped away by the shared battles of the day. "Clara," he said, and the way he spoke her name was a caress. "All my life I've worked for other men's dreams. Your father's and I was proud to do it. But this is—" He took a step closer, his presence filling the small space. "This feels like ours." The air between them grew thick, charged with everything left unsaid. The weeks of shared sunrises, the trial by fire, the quiet moments of understanding it, all led to this. He raised his hand, not to her cheek this time, but to the side of her neck, his thumb resting gently on her pulse point. Her heart hammered against his touch. He was real. This was real. He lowered his head, his gaze searching hers, asking a silent question. She gave him his answer by leaning into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. His kiss was not the tentative exploration she might have expected from such a reserved man. It was firm, sure, filled with all the pent-up longing and respect and fierce, protective tenderness he had kept locked away for so long. It tasted of dust and wind, and an honest, hard-won strength. It was a kiss that spoke of belonging, of coming home. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, losing herself in the solid, comforting reality of him. This was what she had been fighting for, she realized. Not just the land, not just the legacy, but this man. This feeling of being seen, of being cherished, of being an equal partner in a life that mattered. When the kiss finally broke, they rested their foreheads together, their breath mingling in the cool air. He began, his voice rough with emotion. I have nothing to offer you, Clara. Not the life you're used to, just this. Hard work. And my heart. It's the only thing I want, she whispered, her voice choked with tears of a joy so profound it was painful. It's everything. The sound of an automobile, aggressive and loud, shattered the perfect stillness of the night. Headlights swept across the barn door, a harsh, invasive glare. Arthur had arrived. The real battle was about to begin. But as Silas's hand found hers in the darkness, his grip strong and steady, Clara knew she was ready. She was no longer alone. Arthur Vaughn was a man sculpted by the sharp, unforgiving angles of Wall Street. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark city suit, and his face, so unlike their father's warm, weathered countenance, was pale and perpetually pinched with a look of anxious disapproval. He surveyed High Ridge not with nostalgia, but with the irritated air of a landlord inspecting a delinquent property. He saw not beauty, but neglect, not potential, but liability. He stormed into the ranch house, his younger sister and her foreman trailing in his wake like two errant schoolchildren. He threw his briefcase onto the dining table, the sound echoing the slam of a gavel. Clara, what in God's name do you think you're doing? He demanded, his voice sharp and incisive. I sent you here to finalize a sale, to solve our financial crisis, not to start playing rancher with the help. His dismissive glance at Silas was filled with a patrician contempt that made Clara's blood boil. She stepped forward, placing herself between her brother and Silas, a small but significant act of defiance. His name is Silas, she said, her voice dangerously calm. And he is the general manager of this ranch, my partner, and we are not selling. Arthur stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. Partner? Clara, listen to yourself. You are a Vaughn. He is a cowboy. This is not some romantic novel. This is our inheritance, what's left of it, and you are throwing it away on a whim. It is not a whim, she countered, her voice rising with passion. She gestured to the proposal lying on the table, the pages now filled with notes and figures. It's a plan, Father's plan. A plan to make this place profitable, to build a future, not just sell off the past for scrap. Arthur picked up the proposal, his lip curling in a sneer as he scanned the pages. Irrigation? Cattle cooperatives? This is the fanciful dreaming of a man who ran this place into the ground. I loved Father Clara, but he was a romantic, not a businessman. The bank will laugh you out of the building. That's where you're wrong, a low voice said from the doorway. All three turned. It was Silas. He had remained silent, allowing Clara to fight her own battle. But Arthur's insult to her father was a line he would not let him cross. He stepped into the room, holding his worn hat in his hands, but there was nothing subservient in his posture. He stood tall, his gaze level and firm. a quiet authority radiating from him that seemed to diminish Arthur's blustering anger. "Mr. Vaughn," Silas said, his tone respectful but unwavering. "Your father wasn't a fool. He was ahead of his time. This plan isn't a fantasy. It's based on sound agricultural principles. And it's not just our plan anymore." He placed a folded piece of paper on the table next to the proposal. "I have just come from Prairie Creek. This is a letter of intent, signed by John Hemlock of the Double H, the Miller brothers, and 3 other local ranchers. They have agreed, in principle, to form the cooperative. They are pooling their assets and their trust with High Ridge." Arthur stared at the paper, at the rough, scrawled signatures, his face a mask of disbelief. This was a complication he had not anticipated. It was one thing to foreclose on a single, indebted ranch. It was another thing entirely to fight a unified front of half the ranchers in the valley. "It's a bluff," he stammered, recovering his composure. "A piece of paper. It means nothing. I have spoken to Mr. Harrison at the bank. He is a friend of mine. He assures me the foreclosure proceedings are already in motion. The meeting is set for Friday. This little performance changes nothing." "Then we will be at that meeting," Clara declared, her chin held high. "You, me, and Silas. We will present our plan to Mr. Harrison directly. We will present our partnership with the other ranchers. We will ask for an investment, not a handout. We will give the bank a choice: a small return on a dead property, or a profitable partnership in a thriving enterprise." A tense, heavy silence filled the room. Arthur looked from his sister's determined face to the foreman's quiet, resolute strength. He saw an alliance he could not comprehend, a passion that defied his logical, cynical view of the world. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. He had come here expecting to find his sister overwhelmed and compliant. He had found a stranger, a fighter, a woman who looked at the hired hand with a loyalty and love that was, to him, utterly baffling. "Friday, then," Arthur conceded, his voice clipped. "I will be there to ensure the bank's interests, and our families, are protected from your folly." He turned on his heel and retreated to the guest room, the door closing behind him with a definitive thud. The confrontation left the air in the room vibrating with tension. Clara felt a tremor of reaction run through her, the adrenaline of the fight giving way to a profound weariness. Silas moved to her side, his presence a solid, reassuring anchor. "He won't help us," she said, her voice hollow. "We never expected him to," Silas replied, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "This is our fight, Clara. It always has been." His touch was warm, comforting. She leaned into it, drawing strength from his quiet certainty. The final battle would be fought in a sterile bank office, a world of suits and contracts, a world that was alien to Silas and all too familiar to her. They would be facing her brother, a hostile banker, and a mountain of debt. Their only weapons were a dead man's dream, a handful of scrawled signatures, and the stubborn, unyielding belief they had in the land and in each other. It felt like an impossible fight. But as she looked into Silas's steady blue eyes, she knew she would not, could not, back down. The drive to Bozeman was a silent, tense affair. Clara drove the Ford, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Arthur sat beside her, a rigid statue of disapproval, while Silas sat in the back, his large frame looking out of place in the cramped vehicle. He was wearing his Sunday best, a clean, pressed shirt and trousers, but he still wore his worn work boots, a quiet testament to the man he was. He held his hat on his lap, his gaze fixed on the rolling landscape as if drawing strength from it. The bank was an imposing stone edifice, a temple dedicated to the god of commerce. Its cool, marble interior and hushed, reverent atmosphere were designed to intimidate. Mr. Harrison's office was the inner sanctum, a large room paneled in dark mahogany, dominated by a desk the size of a small wagon. Mr. Harrison was a man who seemed to have been carved from the same mahogany as his desk. He was gray-haired, immaculately dressed, and his face was set in an expression of polite, unmovable authority. He greeted Arthur with a warm handshake, and Clara with a condescending pat on the arm. He acknowledged Silas with a curt nod that relegated him to the status of a piece of furniture. "Arthur, my boy," Harrison began, settling into his large leather chair. "A unfortunate business, this. I had the utmost respect for your father, but sentiment, as you know, has no place on a balance sheet. The board has reviewed the file. The debt is significant. The ranch has been unprofitable for years. Foreclosure is the only prudent course of action." Arthur nodded in agreement. "I concur, Mr. Harrison. My sister, however, has developed some alternative notions." He gestured towards Clara with a flick of his wrist. This was her moment. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, but her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady. She had rehearsed this in her mind 100 times. "Mr. Harrison," she began, "what you see as a liability, we see as an untapped asset. You're looking at the past. I'm here to present you with the future." She laid their proposal on the polished surface of the desk. She spoke for 20 minutes, her words flowing with a passion and precision that surprised even herself. She explained the irrigation plan, the improvements to the herd, the genius of her father's vision. She didn't just present numbers, she painted a picture of a revitalized, thriving ranch, a cornerstone of the local economy. Harrison listened with an expression of polite boredom, his fingers steepled before him. "A charming vision, Miss Vaughn. But vision doesn't pay mortgages. These plans require significant capital. Capital the bank is not prepared to risk on such a speculative venture." "It's not a speculative venture," Clara countered, her voice rising. "It's an investment in a community." She slid the letter of intent across the desk. "This is not just High Ridge. This is a cooperative of the 6 largest ranches in the Prairie Creek Valley. We are asking for a partnership, not charity. We are offering you the chance to be the financial backbone of a new, powerful economic force in this territory." Harrison glanced at the letter, his eyebrow raising a fraction of an inch. This was clearly new information. He looked at Arthur, who simply shrugged, as if to say, "I told you she was being difficult." The banker turned his cold gaze on Silas, who had remained silent throughout the presentation. "And you, Mr. Silas," he supplied, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "Silas," Harrison repeated, the name sounding foreign on his tongue. "You are the foreman, the man on the ground. You've worked this land your whole life. Tell me, honestly, do you truly believe this fanciful plan can work?" It was a trap. Harrison was attempting to divide them, to use Silas's perceived simplicity against Clara's polished presentation. He expected a hesitant, simple answer from a simple man. He was about to be disappointed. Silas leaned forward slightly, his calloused hands resting on his knees. He did not look at the banker. He looked at Clara, and in his eyes she saw all the love and belief that had brought them to this room. "Mr. Harrison," Silas said, his voice calm and steady, filled with an unshakable authority that came not from money or position, but from a lifetime of hard-won knowledge. "I don't just believe it can work. I know it can. I know the soil on that land like the back of my own hand. I know the water, the grass, the animals. This plan," he tapped the proposal with a single definitive finger, "is not fanciful. It's practical. It's smart. It's built on the truth of the land. Your bank is built on paper. High Ridge is built on granite and good soil. I ask you, sir, which is the sounder foundation?" The silence that followed was absolute. Silas's words, simple, powerful, and profoundly true, had shifted the very atmosphere in the room. He had not argued numbers or projections. He had spoken of fundamentals. He had, in his own quiet way, questioned the very foundation of the banker's world. Harrison stared at Silas, a flicker of grudging respect in his cold eyes. He looked at the proposal again, then at the letter from the ranchers. He looked at Arthur's weak, vacillating face, and then at Clara's fierce, determined one. He was a banker, a man of calculated risks. And he was suddenly seeing that the greater risk might be in betting against the two people sitting before him. He leaned back in his chair, a long, slow sigh escaping his lips. The final decision was his to make. The fate of High Ridge, of Silas and Clara's future, of a whole community's hope, rested on the next words to come out of his mouth. Mr. Harrison picked up the proposal, his thumb brushing over the cover as if weighing the paper itself. The silence in the mahogany-paneled office stretched, taut, and thin. He was no longer looking at Clara or Silas, but through them, at the columns of invisible figures only he could see, calculating odds, weighing risk against potential. "Your father, Miss Vaughn," he said finally, his voice musing, "was a good man. A terrible accountant, but a good man. He came into this very office a dozen times, filled with plans, with passion. I turned him down every time. It was the sensible, prudent thing to do." He paused, his gaze shifting to Silas. "And every time, I felt a small, unprofessional pang of regret. There is something to be said for a man who believes in the soil." He tented his fingers, his expression unreadable. "This cooperative, this changes the equation. A single ranch failing is a footnote in our ledgers. An entire community collapsing is a headline. It's bad for business." He looked at Arthur. "And frankly, Arthur, the offer from Sterling's syndicate, while lucrative, always felt predatory. They would have strip-mined that valley for a quick profit and left it barren." He sighed. A man caught between the rigid rules of his profession and a flicker of something else. Vision, perhaps. Or just a tired man's desire to, for once, build something instead of tearing it down. "All right," he said, the word dropping into the silence with the weight of a stone. "I'm not tearing up the foreclosure notice." "Not yet." Clara's heart sank. Arthur allowed a small, triumphant smile to cross his lips. "But," Harrison continued, holding up a hand, "I am prepared to table it. I will grant you a provisional extension. 6 months." He leaned forward, his eyes hard as agates. "I will not give you the full capital you're asking for, not yet, but I will authorize a small, initial loan. Enough to purchase the breeding stock you need and the basic equipment to begin the irrigation survey. Consider it Saeed money." He pointed a stern finger at them. "In 6 months I want to see progress, tangible, measurable progress. I want to see the cooperative legally formed. I want to see the new stock thriving. I want to see ground broken on that irrigation project. If I see that, we will revisit the larger investment. If I don't," he let the threat hang in the air, The foreclosure proceeds without delay, and there will be no second chances. Do we have an agreement? It wasn't a victory. It was a stay of execution. It was a monumental, almost impossible task, but it was a chance. It was the only chance they had. Clara looked at Silas. He met her gaze, and in his eyes she saw not fear, but a quiet, steady resolve. He gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. Asterisk, we can do this. Asterisk, we have an agreement, Mr. Harrison, Clara said, her voice filled with a strength she didn't know she possessed. Arthur sputtered, his face flushing with anger. This is madness. You're throwing good money off to bad. It is my decision to make, Arthur, Harrison said, his tone firm, dismissing him. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. 6 months. Don't disappoint me. Or, more accurately, don't disappoint your father's memory. They walked out of the bank and into the bright Montana sunlight, blinking like creatures emerging from a long, dark cave. The world seemed different, sharper, infused with a terrifying, exhilarating possibility. Arthur, defeated and furious, barely said a word. When they returned to the ranch, he packed his bags in a stony silence. As he was leaving, he paused on the porch, looking at his sister as if she were a stranger. He will ruin you, Arthur said, his voice low and bitter. He didn't even look at Silas. This place, this fantasy, it will break your heart. Don't come crying to me when it does. He turned and left without a backward glance, his expensive motor car kicking up a cloud of dust, a final parting insult. The dust settled, leaving a profound quiet in its wake. The last of the opposition was gone. It was just them now. Clara and Silas stood on the porch, side by side, looking out over the land that was, for now, still theirs. The weight of the challenge before them was immense, a mountain of work and worry. 6 months. It was no time at all. Clara felt a tremor of fear, a wave of doubt. Had she been a fool? Had she doomed them all? She must have made a sound, because Silas turned to her, his brow furrowed with concern. Clara? She looked at him, at his strong, steady presence. He was her anchor. He was her partner. He was her home. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers lacing through his. We have so much to do, she whispered. He brought her hand to his lips, his kiss gentle against her knuckles. I know, he said, his voice a low, confident rumble. But we have 6 months to do it. He turned her to face him, his hands framing her face. He looked deep into her eyes, and all her fear melted away in the warmth of his gaze. We have land, we have water, we have a plan, and we have each other. It's more than enough. He lowered his head and kissed her, a deep, possessive kiss filled with the promise of sunrises and hard work, of shared struggles and quiet triumphs. It was the kiss of a new beginning. She was Clara Vaughn, a woman who had come to sell a ranch, and he was Silas, a foreman who believed he had nothing to offer. But standing there, on the porch of the home they would fight for together, they had everything that mattered. The future of High Ridge stretched out before them, vast and uncertain, but it was a future they would build with their own 2 hands, heart to heart, side by side. The work was just beginning. The dawn of their 6-month reprieve broke beautiful and indifferent, painting the sky in strokes of rose and gold. For Clara and Silas, it was the starting pistol for a desperate race against time. The quiet joy of their personal victory was immediately subsumed by the crushing weight of their promises. They had 6 months to turn a tide that had been going out for years. Their first act was to formally create the High Ridge Cooperative. They gathered the ranchers not in a stuffy office, but in the large open-air barn at High Ridge, a neutral ground that smelled of honest work. Silas laid out the terms of the loan from the bank, the small amount of seed money, the steep requirements, the unforgiving deadline. He didn't soften the blow. He presented the truth, stark and unvarnished. "It's a fool's bargain," grumbled John Hemlock, a man whose face was a roadmap of droughts and hard winters. "He's given us just enough rope to hang ourselves." A murmur of agreement went through the small crowd. These were men accustomed to disappointment, who trusted hardship more than they trusted hope. It was Clara who stepped forward, her voice ringing with a conviction that cut through their skepticism. "Mr. Hemlock, you're right. It's not the deal we wanted, but it's the only deal we have. For years, we've all been fighting alone, slowly losing ground. The banks, the railroads, the big beef syndicates, they pick us off one by one. But this agreement," she held up the document they had all signed, "this makes us one entity. For the first time, we have leverage. We have a chance to fight back. All we have to do is be brave enough to take it." She looked from face to face, her gaze unflinching. "My father dreamed of this. Silas has shown us how to build it. The bank has given us a foundation, however small. The rest is up to us. Are we going to let our pride and our fear be the things that finally break us, or are we going to work together and build something that will last for our children?" Her words, spoken with the polish of the city but filled with the fire of the land, resonated with them. They saw not just an owner's daughter, but a leader. They saw the quiet, steady man at her side, a man they trusted, and they saw his unwavering belief in her. After a long, tense silence, Hemlock gave a slow, deliberate nod. "The girl's got grit," he said to the man beside him. "And the foreman's got sense. All right, let's get to work." And so the work began. It was a relentless, back-breaking, dawn-to-dusk effort. Silas, with a small crew, took on the irrigation survey. They spent weeks in the high country, hauling transits and chains, driving stakes into the hard, rocky ground, plotting the most efficient path for water to flow from the mountains to the parched southern fields. It was grueling work that left them caked in dirt and exhausted to the bone each night. Clara, meanwhile, took on the task of acquiring the new breeding stock. Armed with Silas's notes and a portion of the bank's loan, she traveled to other territories, to ranches renowned for their hardy Hereford bulls. It was a world dominated by men, and she faced constant condescension and attempts to cheat her. But she was armed with her father's knowledge and her own sharp intellect. She inspected the animals with a critical eye, debated bloodlines, and negotiated prices with a ferocity that earned her a grudging respect. She returned to High Ridge weeks later, weary but triumphant, with a small herd of the finest bulls the territory had ever seen. The sight of them, powerful and majestic, being driven into the High Ridge pastures was a tangible symbol of their progress, a shot of adrenaline for the entire cooperative. The ranch itself was transformed into a hive of activity. Fences were mended, barns were repaired, and a new, larger corral was built to handle the combined herds. The men of the cooperative worked alongside the High Ridge hands, their initial skepticism slowly melting away in the face of shared sweat and common purpose. The evenings, which had once been quiet, were now filled with the sounds of men sharing stories and coffee around the bunkhouse stove, their talk a mix of ranching, worries, and a growing, fragile hope. Through it all, the bond between Clara and Silas deepened, forged in the crucible of their shared labor. Their partnership was a seamless dance. In the evenings, they would pore over maps and account books by lantern light, their minds working in tandem. He would explain the practical challenges of the land, she would devise the financial strategies to overcome them. Their days were a series of shared glances across a crowded corral, a brief touch of hands as they passed a tool, a quiet moment at sunset watching the new bulls graze. Their love was not a thing of whispered sweet nothings or stolen hours. It was a living, breathing part of their work, woven into the very fabric of their days. It was in the way he brought her a cup of coffee at dawn, just the way she liked it, without her ever having to ask. It was in the way she would defend his decisions to the other ranchers, her belief in him absolute. It was a partnership of the mind, the body, and the soul. One night, after a particularly grueling day, she found him standing by the fence of the main pasture, watching the new bulls settle in for the night. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual, but his face held a look of profound satisfaction. "They're beautiful," she said, coming to stand beside him. "They're a good start," he replied, his gaze fixed on the powerful animals. He turned to her, a rare, soft smile on his face. "You did well, Clara. Your father would be proud." "We are doing well," she corrected, leaning her head against his shoulder. His arm came around her, pulling her close in a gesture that felt as natural as breathing. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars begin to prick the deep velvet of the sky. The weight of their task was still there, a constant pressure on their shoulders, but in moments like this, it felt manageable. "Sometimes," she confessed, her voice a near whisper, "I get so scared. I'm terrified we'll fail." He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her jaw, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "Look at what we've done already," he said, his voice a low, steadying rumble. "We brought a community together. We brought these animals here. We're mapping a river in the mountains. We are making this happen, Clara, together." He kissed her then, a kiss that was not about passion, but about reassurance, about partnership, about a deep and abiding love that was their truest and strongest asset. As they stood there, wrapped in the quiet of the Montana night, they were more than just a rancher and a foreman. They were the heart of a dream, and with every sunrise, with every drop of sweat, they were slowly, painstakingly, turning that dream into a reality. The road ahead was long and fraught with peril, but for the first time, the destination felt truly within their reach.